Alright, my number 10 probably should have been a film that was so bad it was good, just based off the premise alone. But this movie made it so boring. Number 10 is Hurricane Heist. The premise sounds amazingly bad, but this movie itself is just boring, like I said. Oh yeah, there's definitely moments of ridiculous hilarity, like the hurricane forming a skull in the clouds to roar at our main characters. Yeah, that's in the movie. But between those ridiculous moments, it's just... ugh. Also, you get a lot of bad acting in this film, a lot of awful characters, and just stupid movie. That's about it. The trailer is far funnier than the movie actually is. Now that is one annoying trailer. Alright, my number 9 is a January movie, so this has actually moved up and down the list quite often, but it has stayed in my top 10 worst films of the year so far, and that is Day of the Dead Bloodlines. Sorry, Day of the Dead Bloodline. Oh God, where do I even start with this movie? I probably shouldn't talk too much about it because I'm rewatching January movies. I have rewatched this, and if people are interested, I might just make a review of this movie. But this is one of the worst remakes I've ever seen, and so much so that I really can't even call it a remake because it has nothing of the Day of the Dead classic in this movie. I mean, it has elements. It has the setting an underground base. One of the main antagonists is a soldier who's running the base, and there's a lot of conflict between our main character and him, and she's a medical student, so she's kind of like the scientist of the group, or the medical person of the group. And there is a zombie that is smart in the film, but this movie takes it to a whole different, crazy, whacked out level. All the themes that George Romero's Day of the Dead has is non-existent in this movie. It tries to make it its own by having the zombie being different, whereas instead of a zombie slowly regaining a little bit more humanity as scientists experiment with him, instead this movie is, what if our main character had a stalker, and that stalker gets bitten, but he's immune to the virus, but he still dies, so he turns into a zombie, but he's smart, and his blood is the key to curing the disease. And now that zombie knows that she's still alive and is ready to stalk her and break into the base, trying to do stuff to her. That's that's Day of the Dead Bloodline. Now I will give it some credit. At least it tries to make it its own, and some of the things that it tries to make its own with that whole concept of what the smart zombie is pretty decent. Everything else is just plain awful about this movie. And I'll definitely have to review this someday because there's a lot of crap to get through. Especially since the opening sequence of this film actually made it like it was going to be a comedy. It felt like it was going to be a spoof, but it's all serious. It's not a spoof. Alright, number 8 shows that even though Blumhouse can have a good track record, they still make crappy movies too, and that is Truth or Dare. There were people that were wondering why people were a little bit hesitant about Blumhouse getting the rights to Halloween, because they're like, well, Blumhouse is responsible for Get Out. They also produced M. Night Shyamalan's movies, the newest ones. They also did Happy Death Day. That was fun. They did all these other things lately. Yeah, they also made Truth or Dare. They have good movies and they have shitty movies. And this is one of the shitty movies. Hell, I barely remember this film. I just remember it being awful and not scary at all, with characters I could care less about, with rules that don't quite make sense. This movie tried to make Truth or Dare a haunted, evil thing, possessed by a demon. And it has the ending to Rings, pretty much. Yeah, this was a bad film. Alright, for those of you that thought Death Wish was way too high, and kind of questioning why I thought Bruce Willis actually gave a performance in Death Wish, well, my proof is number 7. My number 7 is acts of violence. Bruce Willis is a supporting character in this movie. I mean, he's probably the highest build, so he's the most prominent person in the trailer, probably. But, yeah, he's a side character, and he could give two shits that he's even in this movie. He does not care, and he's playing a cop who is tired about how everything doesn't work out and how the bad guys keep getting away and getting away with everything. But no, it doesn't look like that. It just looks like Bruce Willis just doesn't care to be in this movie at all. It's one of those straight-to-DVD movies that he's constantly in nowadays. This movie is boring, it's cheap, bad acting, characters I could care less about, it's full of stupid moments, and some people are like, oh, well, this at least gives us some notice of human trafficking. This is an action film that shows human trafficking, and that we should be more aware of that. Oh, okay. Well, on that same argument, what about frickin' Taken? That's an excellent action movie. That involves human trafficking. And that was way before Acts of Violence. Acts of Violence is just one cheap, terrible movie. This is one of the reasons why I go back and rewatch films and also watch some films for the first time of the ones that I missed, because when I was rewatching January movies and seeing some movies from the first time, I got to see The Beyond. And that is my number 6 of the worst films of the first half of the year. I'm definitely going to have to talk about this one longer when I make a review, because there's so much of this that is just plain stupid and just plain bad. Alright, try to think of it this way. You have a movie that has elements of really great sci-fi movies. Think of it as a mesh of Arrival meets RoboCop meets Interstellar. Think of those 3 movies. Now take away all the great things from those 3 movies, like all the social commentary, all the good sci-fi qualities. Take away everything that is good about those 3 films, mix them together, put it in a documentary style, and that is The Beyond. And it's available on Netflix. I mean, that's where I watched it. I watched it on Netflix. I don't know if it's available for everyone who has the Netflix account. Probably available for everyone in the US, unless it gets taken down after my countdown. But I saw it on Netflix, and it was, oh God, it was boring and terrible, and just reminded me that I could be seeing much better sci-fi films than this garbage. My number 5, I think did it recently come out on DVD now, or it's coming out to DVD? I can't remember, but my number 5 is Life of the Party. Now, I don't mind Melissa McCarthy. I think she does good sometimes. If she has the right director and the right script, she's pretty darn funny. But when she's with her husband, when her husband is directing it, that team is just disastrous. I didn't think it could get worse than The Boss and Tammy. This is worse than both The Boss and Tammy. This is This is barely a movie. It's just unfunny, embarrassing, and just awkward to sit through. And to think I'm probably going to have to rewatch this film just to see if its score holds up. When did that come out? Was that May? Yeah, it was May, wasn't it? Because I was on vacation. Oh, at least I'm only on January so far when it comes to rewatching movies. So I probably won't rewatch Life of the Party until next year, I'd imagine. Alright, my number 4 is kind of sad to put on this list because I do like Clint Eastwood. I do like him as director. But 1517 to Paris was just plain awful. So many bad decisions in this movie, and a lot of it I feel can be blamed on poor Clint Eastwood. He had a lot of direction in this movie and he made a lot of the wrong decisions. I'm hoping The Mule is good. The Mule looks good. Hopefully it'll change my perception of him, because the 1517 to Paris was one of the worst films I saw in theaters. There is a bright spot in this movie. It's the last bit of the movie, when it's actually the train and actually them taking down the terrorists. All that is handled good. The problem is, that's only like the last part of the movie. Most of the movie is getting the lives of these characters. And it doesn't help that non-professional actors are the ones playing these characters, because it's the actual heroes themselves in the movie playing themselves. But surprisingly, as bad as they are, all the professional actors were even freaking worse, and I couldn't believe it. It's just, oh God, this was horrible. So yeah, with the top 5 worst films of the year, they were horrible to sit through. And so, as you can imagine, if 5 and 4 were bad, 3 was even worse. 3 is Super Troopers 2. Now this was doubly bad for me, because before I went to see this movie, I had never seen the cult classic Super Troopers. And because I didn't see it when I was a teenager, I saw it through the eyes of what I am now. And I did not find the first one all that funny. I would say the first one is way better than the second one, mainly because there's at least one character, no, 2 characters that I actually like in the film. But what made Super Troopers 2 worse for me is because I watched Super Troopers right before I went to see Super Troopers 2. So I basically got a double whammy of 2 horrible films, with the second one being even worse, and pretty much the same movie, just in a different setting. And a few things here and there changed. And it was awful. It was really, really awful. I was in pain watching this movie. And this is only number 3 of the worst films of the year so far. Number 2 is Gotti. This is a mess. The only ones that could possibly like this film is people that are in complete denial, or people that actually know the story of Gotti, because ultimately this movie is just little sort of plot points of his life that don't amount to an actual story. And it's just the only reason I knew nothing about John Gotti when I went into the film, and after seeing the movie I still knew nothing about him. There's so many characters that only people that know his life and know of him would possibly know what's going on in this film. This is a mess. It's an unfinished film, it feels like. It's not acted all that well. It has moments of violence in it that just feel like completely random and pointless. This whole movie feels pointless, and it was just horrible to sit through. This is like the Bronx Bowl all over again. The Bronx Bowl was last year. At least that I didn't see in theaters. Gotti I saw in theaters. But the worst film so far this year, and will probably stay the worst film of the year for quite some time, maybe even all the way to the end, is Show Dogs. Now there's one regret that I have when it comes to Show Dogs. Apparently this movie had a controversial scene in it that was so inappropriate for children that they had to cut that scene out and re-release it into theaters without that scene. Unfortunately, I was on vacation when that movie came out. So by the time I came home and watched the film, I saw the recut version. So I didn't get to see the controversial, upsetting film, which, from what I hear, was probably the funniest, most hilariously bad part of this movie. So without that, and with plot points leading to that point, without any sort of resolve happening, this is probably even worse without its controversial scene. I can't even believe that. This was awful. It was boring. It was painful. It was dreadful. Every bad adjective, every negative adjective that you can think of was this movie. It's... oh, God. And that was May too, wasn't it? Because it was the same month as Life of the Party. Fuck. May's going to be horrible to sit through when it comes to rewatching movies from May. Glad that probably won't happen until next year. Yay. So, when it comes to January through June of 2018, those were my 20 worst films of the year so far. So, did you see any of those films? Would they make your list of worst films of the year so far? Go ahead, comment below. And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews or countdowns of this year or previous years of whatever. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.